So student engagement ideas. And I'm going to flip real quick. Really quick, what is engagement? And by the way, I'm not sure why, but I can't see. Let me see. Oh, here, I'm opening a chat window. I'm going to ask you this question, and I'm going to use one of the techniques that I use to engage students. And by the way, for this presentation, I'm going to give you examples of ways that I engage students, and these include ways that I use for in-person, online, synchronous, and asynchronous. So some of these are ones that can only be used in maybe one mode or maybe two modes, and some of them can be adapted to all modes. Just use your imagination for this. So I'm going to ask you a question, and what I'm going to ask you to do is put your answer into the chat, but don't send it yet, okay? So just write it where it says type your message, and the question is, actually, it's not just what is engagement. My question is more so this: what are ways that you can measure or observe student engagement? Okay, I think we all have a good idea about what engagement is. It's students who come to class, they're prepared, they're participating. What are some ways that you observe your students being engaged? So put that into the chat, but don't hit send quite yet. Give it a second, and I'll give you a minute or close to it to think about it. Or if you can even just give an example of some way where, you know, you felt really good, like, oh yeah, nailed that, my students are engaged.
Recording is on.
Sticking around the spill secrets from some of our biggest roles. Can't wait right after this.
I'm sorry, is somebody, oh, am I difficult to hear? Okay, somebody wrote in that I'm difficult to hear. If you're not speaking, please mute. Okay, so right now, everybody send your answer. So let's blast those answers. Okay, so I like this. They're nodding, they're smiling, they're talking to each other. You see that they're writing. There's eye contact with verbal responses. They're asking questions, good questions, not what are we supposed to be doing, right? I hate that question. I got in trouble for this, but I tell my students that there is such a thing as a stupid question. You know how we always say there's no such thing as a stupid. There is a stupid question. So a stupid question is, what are we doing? Did anybody read what we're supposed to be doing? Or a question that involves something that's either written in the instructions, or you can find the answer by looking at my syllabus. So yes, but so when they're asking these good questions, when they ask question, one student chimes in with another. Yeah, they're having a conversation. They're feeling it. So by the way, I use this technique, and this is one of the techniques that is going to show up in my presentation. But by doing this kind of a blast, where people don't just put in their answers to a question in the chat, if you have an online synchronous class, or even if you have an in-person class and you ask students to write their answers on a sheet of paper and then, wait for a minute and then everybody holds them up, this prevents that bias that people get from reading other people's answers, or they just write what other people wrote, or they go, oh, my answer's wrong or dumb or a bad one. So having a blast allows you to just quickly see what everybody's thinking of. So this is one of the techniques that I use. But all your answers are really good. One of the ways that I really measure it, by the way, is through attendance, not just participating, but attendance, particularly post-COVID. And even during COVID, many of my colleagues were complaining that students just weren't coming to class, whether it was online or when we returned in person. I had one colleague who said that she only has routinely 2 or 3 students who come to her class, which is really kind of shocking. I always have great attendance in my class. I do make attendance mandatory, and anybody can do that. That's easy enough. But students really do willingly come, and I tend to have pretty full classes, and they are engaged in that they are asking questions. I have a lot of students who sit right up front. I don't have too many students. Occasionally I have students who are not paying attention clearly, and very often I'll speak to them and try to find out more about that. As we learned from the opening session, there could be some reason. Maybe they're tired, maybe they're overworked. So I'm going to share some of my ideas, and hopefully we'll have time. You'll share some of your strategies. I'm going to go really quick. I'm talking like in a New York minute because I don't want to go over. I do, for online synchronous courses, choose your background. So many of my colleagues said that they have, when they go on Zoom with synchronous classes, all they see are the students' names because their students don't turn on their cameras. I tell my students that they have to turn on their cameras. So some colleagues said to me, well, that's not really right because some students are very uncomfortable about their home life, their home situation. They may not really want to reveal to people where they are, where they're living. So I say, choose your background. And then, you know, as a conversation starter, you can say, well, why did you choose that background? You know, show us a background in Zoom of a place where you'd like to be. So I like the forest. Sometimes I use a forest background. Sometimes I use other backgrounds, funny backgrounds, pretty backgrounds, but it's a way of engaging with students and making sure that they do have their cameras on, because I do find that that's really important for those online synchronous classes. Otherwise, I suspect a lot of students are kind of in bed. They're horizontal rather than vertical. They're not really paying attention. I tell them you have to be dressed. One, be dressed, sitting up and in front of your camera. But if you use a virtual background, then I don't have to be concerned that I'm embarrassing students. Let me see, how come I can't, going to the next slide. So I do check in with students, and I do that in my in-person classes, my online classes, both synchronous and asynchronous. So this poll, so I'll ask them, are you up to date on assignments? And I give them some choices here. You can see what I've given. And if you look at the bottom where it says, I've fallen far behind and I'm not sure how or if I'll be able to catch up, and it says, see me after class. So if you check that, then I will want to see you, or if you have some other circumstance, then I want to see you. Also, how are you feeling? Students nowadays, I'm sure you're very, very much aware of how stressed they are, how stressed they were during COVID, which is, you know, still going on for sure. But many of my students were really going through a very, very difficult time. Last semester, I had who confided to me that she was planning on committing suicide. And this happened really at a difficult time because I normally check these things every day, and I try to get back to people quickly. But my husband had been in the hospital, so 2 days had lapsed, and I was very, very worried. I asked her to stay. I hoped that nothing had happened in the interim. She did thankfully show up for class, and I was able to have a conversation with her, counseling. And she apparently had a very, very well thought out plan for taking her own life, and the counselors called an ambulance. She was taken to a psychiatric facility, and I don't know anything beyond that because that kind of thing I'm not privy to it. But I hope that by checking in with my students and making sure that they know how much I do care about their well-being, their emotional well-being, their physical well-being, that maybe maybe I'm helping someone, maybe you're even saving a life. I do form groups with my students. So I tend to put them in groups of 3s or 4s, and that works out well because by having 3 or 4, that means that even if a student withdraws, you still have a coupled paired student. When I was in college, I was a physics major, and we had a study group that we formed informally, just a bunch of us got together, and that study group became my fabulous peer support group. I married somebody in that group. It was really everything. Every night we would get together, we would go to our school had a physics library, and we would work on these problem sets, which for me were incredibly difficult to do. And if it weren't for the support, for the camaraderie that I had, for the friendships that I developed, I don't know that I would have gotten through it. And I didn't have half of the issues that so many of my students have being in school. Nothing makes me happier than seeing students in my class develop friendships. I teach a first-year course, so most of my students are new to college, and when I see them becoming friends, I see them light up. I use these, by the way, these groups. I form one group and they stay together. So they become a study group. They develop as social peers. When we have breakout groups, they go together. They develop friendships. They go to events together at times. And here's what I noticed, that the students who have a friend in the class are much more likely to show up. They come, they're happy to be there with their friends. They really like that. So I do my best to facilitate these friendships. I give them time to get to know each other on a regular basis. So of course, when I first put them into the group, I ask them, give them a few questions as conversation starters, and they get to know each other. But then every so often I'll say, okay, we're going to go into our breakout groups. Now, before you work on the classwork, why don't you share with each other something about your favorite pet or your favorite animal or something like that. It could be your spirit animal, it could be a pet that you have. Just coming up with a question so that they further that relationship of getting to know each other. And I've built some really, really great friendships where I've seen those students, a year later, walking through the hallway, still together. The other things that I do is I may have them during a lecture, they'll take notes, and then as a group, compare them. You can use them as discussion groups. They can review each other's work. That's something else they can do, and just provide overall peer support. So that one works really well. For my live in-person classes, I do this technique called get up and move multiple choice, where I can do this for a pre-test or something, where I give them like a quiz, and I'll say corner A is over there, B, C, D, and I'll read them a question. It's multiple choice. The corner where you think the answer is. I can do that for content material. Sometimes I just do it for getting to know each other. So again, I'll give the example of pets. So say, if your favorite, if you have a cat, go to A. If you have a dog, go to B. If you have some other kind of animal, go to C. If you got no animals, go to D. And I can read out a bunch of questions. We just have them move around. If you want questions that are binary, sort of true, false, you can do this by putting students into a circle and saying, if you think the answer is true, move forward. If you think it's false, stay where you are. And again, you can ask questions like, who likes pizza? And they can all move into the circle. Or the ones who do like pizza move into the circle, and then you're surprised to see some people maybe don't like pizza. And again, you can ask these as content questions where, based upon whatever your material, you can ask some questions and see who moves. Now, it is kind of interesting to see, like, if everybody starts moving to the center, or some people looking and going, oh, shoot, I better move into the center. But you get the idea of seeing where they're at. It's kind of a visual way. And again, it gets them up and moving around. Somebody keep an eye on time for me, because I'm not able to see the time, and make sure that we have like 5 or 6 minutes before the end of the class. Would somebody give me a wave? Watching a video and live tweet the answers to a question. So I show this really, really old video called "What is Business?" It's from 1947.
Brendan, you're not fat. It's a shirt.
Hang on one second.
Look
I hate these ads.
Is your class?
It would mean living like this.
So this is from 1947. It's called "What is Business?" You get the idea. And what I do is I ask students to identify things that they think are still the same in business as they were back in 1947. And the truth is, in the end, most everything is the same from 1947, by the way, because business hasn't, it's made some tremendous changes in some ways, but everything that existed in 1947 is still pretty much there. And this way, they're watching the video and they're either tweeting or chatting, and we can watch and see what people are saying. So that's a way of keeping them engaged during the video, so that they're not just falling asleep, although they do really like that video a lot. They're shocked at the fact that people came in black and white years ago. Focus on the news. So I ask students to maybe find or identify a news story that's relevant to the content and bring that in, and I can give them some extra credit. And other times I find something that's in the news that talks to what we're talking about. So in one of my classes, we talk a lot about emotional intelligence. And I don't have to show you the Will Smith video. You all get the idea. But I break them into those groups of 3 and 4, and I ask them, what could Will Smith have done instead? Okay, so what are some other things that may have shown better emotional intelligence? But focusing on the news is interesting to students. They like to see that. They like to see little. Okay, bingo. So by the way, these are all low-tech techniques. This is the only one that involves going to another website, really. And I do something using myfreebingocards.com. I started doing this, by the way, by accident. Years ago, my son was an Eagle Scout. And if you've ever been to an Eagle Scout ceremony, you know that they can be a little bit dry at times. And especially for younger scouts, they can feel a bit boring. They they go through a whole process, takes about an hour, lots of speeches and everything. So in order to keep the scouts engaged at my son's Eagle Scout ceremony, I created some bingo cards where students would listen, where the scouts would listen for keywords in the speeches and cross them off. And if they got a bingo, then I'd give them a really large candy bar or something. So they enjoyed that. But with My Free Bingo, you can do that. And if you're going to do a lecture, you can have students listen to your lecture and listen for those keywords. So when you go through myfreebingocards.com, and I don't have time to go through the website, but it's super easy to use. And what you're going to get are a whole bunch of individual bingo cards. I give each of my students, you get 30 free ones. So I give each of my students a number. So let's say that you're number 7. So then this is going to be your bingo card. Okay. And here are my business terms. Do you see them? So I entered a whole bunch of business terms into my my free bingo card. It's a website, it's not an app. And it gave me a whole bunch of cards. Each one's different. And as students listen, watch what they do. They go, oh, she said ROI. Okay, heard that. What, did she say dividend? Gross profit. Accounts receivable, revenue, bingo. So by the way, this is like one of the easiest things to use if you just want to sort of gamify one of your lessons. Super, super, super duper easy, because sometimes people have shown me some of these ways of gamifying some of these outside websites or apps, and some of them have me going, well, that's going to take a lot of time to prepare. Let me see. Asking students to work the lesson. So if you present a lesson, or if you give students the beginning of a lesson and then ask them to, again, maybe go into those groups, or they can do it individually and complete the lesson or look for more information about the topic, then you can have them create infographics. And students enjoy creating different kinds of infographics for what they've learned or what they find. And this is also a great way for students to absorb information. It's one of the best ways for students to study, to take notes, take notes during a lecture or while in the book, maybe highlight things, and then take that information and rework it. So here's an example. So these are the 6 wives of Henry VIII. We've all heard that. And there's different ways that they can find information. Yeah, I mean, they can go online, find out more information about this topic. And here's just an example of an infographic. This one's kind of interesting. I'm sure that we've all heard, let's see, she was divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. That's one way of looking at this information. But here's one where an infographic can show you something that may not have been obvious, which is that Mary's wife, by the way, was the wife for the vast majority of time. She couldn't provide a male heir, and really none of the others were able to do that either so well, or one who could live into adulthood. But getting students to create an infographic is a good way to get them thinking about material, and it also really helps them to absorb it. The Canvas chat blast, I just did that with you, where I asked you to answer a question and please hold from hitting the submit button, and then everybody submits it at once. Students really enjoy that, and you know, it's a way of not seeing everybody else's answer and then feeling like, okay, you don't have anything to say. Creating peer-reviewed assignments in Canvas. If you're not using that, you really should. Again, it's really easy. I have instructions here in my presentation. You can find them online. It's, again, a great way to get to engage, to read what other people are doing. I do ask them to try to review with some kindness, no matter what. Don't be too critical, but be helpful and give constructive criticism to a student's assignment. And on the upside, it's less grading for you if you can make one or two of your assignments during the semester one that is peer graded. Of course, I do take a look at their grading to make sure that it makes some sense. For discussions, if you use online discussions or if you do discussions in class, you can do these 3-2-1s where you ask students to write down 3 things that they learned, 2 things that they thought were particularly interesting, and maybe 1 question that they have. And again, I do this very often in online discussion responses. So if you're in Canvas or whatever you use, you know, if you have a discussion forum in your class, I always hit the button that says that they can't see anybody else's answer until they've answered, because, you know, otherwise sometimes they're just repeating something that they've already seen. Also, for my discussion responses, I do ask students typically to provide an example that backs up a classmate's assertion. So once they post theirs, then when they have to do the response, you know, normally they post their own answer, and then we normally ask them to respond to another student. So in responding to another student, I tell them, here's your 3 choices. You can either provide an example that backs up what a student asserted. You can politely refute something that a classmate said and explain why you think they're wrong. Or you can come up with a well-formed question about something that a student wrote. So that prevents them from just saying, hey, good answer. I like your answer. Your answer was really clever. I sometimes use the Final Jeopardy style Zoom question. So you can ask students a question, have them think about it. You can do this live in class or on, you know, or in Zoom, and then have them write the answer down, and then all at once, this is similar to the blast, have them hold that up and say, here's my answer. Okay. No, nothing meant by triple X there. I apologize for that. I didn't even realize, but you get the idea. So they all, you know, hold up their answers. So much like in Jeopardy, everybody hold up your answer and see what you've got. Inviting a guest speaker is great. I don't have time, but I was going to show you. Usually I just do a really short one because guest speakers sometimes aren't good at lecturing unless you have a guest who's really good at lecturing. I usually have them introduce the topic. It's great if they can say, hello, you know, class, Dr. Circus invited me to speak. They like that because that's better than just finding a YouTube video. You can honestly say, here's somebody I know who's an expert in this. Here's somebody who does this for a living. Divide and conquer. So you can take a topic, divide it into maybe 4 learning points, and again, go to those groups of 3 or 4 students. If you divide it into 3 or 4 topics, so take a bigger topic and then ask each student, number the students, so you could have in each group student 1, 2, 3, and 4, and give each of them a sub-bit of that topic to become an expert on, and then teach the others in the group to, you know, what they've learned about the topic. So you create groups of 4 students, 1 for each topic, have the students teach each other about their topic, or you can break the class into 4 groups, 1 for each topic, and have each group create learning materials and lessons. A scavenger hunt for learning sources. So give students a topic and help them find sources to share. You can use this in a discussion forum for the asynchronous online courses. Again, you don't let students show the see what other people have written until they've posted theirs. But you can ask students, hey, if we're going to talk about, let's say, Henry VIII and politics during that time or something, you can ask students to search the internet, look for the best resources they can find, whether they're peer-reviewed papers, whether they're copies of original sources or something, and have them post that, and then have the students work together to curate this material into a lesson. And then there's a few things that I do just for fun. And so, for example, online classes, sometimes I'll do a pet day. I've brought my cats for students to see. They enjoy that. I ask students to show up, bring their pet onto the camera or post a picture. We played Quiplash. By the way, during the pandemic, when students were particularly stressed, we didn't do this during class. We did it after class. If you don't know what Quiplash is a fun game that you can play in a matter of 15, 20 minutes, and it allows students to come up to fill in the blank on a question. There is a family-friendly mode, so I always hit that mode because otherwise it can be kind of suggestive. Don't be surprised if you get a lot of toilet humor, even among college students. And finally, this is one that I really did do, and my students actually loved it. And this, again, happened, this was in March of 2020 when everybody was sent home, and my students were particularly stressed. At the very end of class, I asked students, I said, well, class is over, but if you want to stick around and sing with me, we're going to, I'll share a song with you and we'll all sing it together. Now, singing together on Zoom is kind of tough because there's a delay and all, but it's still doable. And, as long as everybody understands that it's not going to sound professional and that I can barely sing, but I would sing to my students Three Little Birds. And so, do you know the Bob Marley song, don't worry about a thing, every little thing's going to be all right. And I was, it was kind of risky, and I was I was very self-conscious about it because I'm not a good singer, and I wasn't sure whether they would go for it, but they all seemed so uptight. I had students whose weddings were canceled, things were, bad things were happening. They had relatives who were sick. It was, they were afraid to go to work, but they had to go to work. They were, frontline workers and all, and we would sing. And what I saw is that we started singing, and then they would grab their kids or their siblings. I had a grandmother there. I had a couple of fathers there, and of course they knew all the words to the song because it's an older song, and they were singing. And in the end, we probably did it maybe 5 times, and all my students really loved it. So that's the end of my presentation. And now I'm going to ask you if you have any questions or if you'd like to share your ideas, because I think I'm running out of time. Sorry, I know I moved real fast.
Jocelyn, I have a question. There was another game you mentioned on the same slide as
Quiplash.
Can you spell that again, please?
Quiplash. And it does cost a little bit of money, but once you have it for good. It's not expensive, and sometimes it goes on sale. It's available through something called Jackbox Games. And it was a strictly for fun thing because I saw my students and I saw how very stressed out they were. I know you adore your students. I adore my students. My students, the feedback that I get from students is that I'm very maternal, that I'm the mother or aunt they always wanted. And I do love them. I really do. I love them so much. I think they are so beautiful. And to see them so upset and so frazzled and not knowing what was going on, it meant an awful lot for us to be together and to play this game with each other. By the way, only 8 people can play at a time, but the other people are all part of the audience who vote. So you may only get a few students who want to play, but they all want to be ones who vote because they vote for what is the best or the funniest answer. So Quiplash was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much.
Anybody, your ideas? What have you done in your class? Techniques or tools?
It's okay. I do a number of things. This is Mel. And again, what mode I'm teaching will vary. I'm back on face-to-face classes and out of synchronous classes. I still have some asynchronous ones. But I actually have my students on the first day of class in pairs, if on even one group of 3. They actually put together jigsaw puzzles. And they're made out of wood. I actually made them all, but I don't tell the students that till the end that I created them. But it's amazing how many different components you can talk about it. I can do it for problem solving, which is how I originally started doing it, but it's also evolved into many other different components that we're trying to get across during the semester, but while they're actually doing something, which works really well. I have also, by the way, when we were synchronous, we did try singing because that is a major part of one of my classes where we sing folk songs for an hour and 20 minutes from the Old West.
What do you teach?
I teach anthropology, human and regional geography, and sociology.
Really?
I'm at Carroll Community College, yeah.
And you sang. And
I sing all the time in class. I have them sing with me.
My students love the singing.
They loved it. It didn't work really well as far as the lag times, but I did have a student come by my office just before this last semester ended that I had the year we were synchronous and was talking about how much fun it was to listen to it totally out of sync, which I thought was kind of funny, that they really enjoyed that. I do a couple other things that involve music this semester in a sociology class. I had my students, I was trying to teach group dynamics and how, as you do, whether you're a large group getting to half that size of a class down to, and then I set up groups that were 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, to make it, to find out, how did you interact while you were in those different size groups. But I started off with a really stupid song, which was written by the Arrogant Worms. It's a Canadian group. It's called Rocks and Trees, and basically it starts off by saying what doesn't exist in Canada, but they have lots of rocks and trees. And that's all you do. You sing rocks and trees and rocks and water. That's the last thing. But till the last day of class, I could say the word rocks, and they would remember the entire lesson on group dynamics, and we also were doing leadership that day. And it's amazing. It was like that trigger component that was going there. Anyway, I have a long list, but I'm sure other people have great things they do too.
Those are great. And by the way, I like the puzzle idea because I teach leadership, and that could be really good for, well, did somebody take on a leadership role, or did somebody, for talking about that. So yeah. Yeah.
And I was doing that when we did the rocks and trees, and I did the different size groups, was you found that a group of 2 taking on leadership was less than in a group of 7. It was like, had to be happening. So you can really demonstrate that component.
Thank you. Thank you, Mel. Anyone else? Ideas you've used to engage students? Am I near the end of my time? I forget when I end. Does anybody have the schedule up in front of them? I just want to make sure.
Goes to 11:05.
11:05. Yeah.
Okay, so we've just got a few more minutes. Anyone else, or your feedback on these ideas? I did call it from the ridiculous to the sublime, but I have used every one of these in my classes, and they've been effective. Anyone else? Something you've done? Something you think might work? Something you read about? Something you saw?
I can give you one more, unless somebody else wants to go. On my asynchronous courses in the discussions, I don't allow my students to repeat on other students' examples. So you say you post them all at one time. I can allow them to see and read and get ideas, but because they cannot repeat an example and they have to come up with something that's actually happened in the world in their examples, they also then have to cite their sources in there as well in the actual discussions. But not repeating really helps a discussion to go different directions and get different viewpoints.
Yep. I click the button. We use Canvas, and I click the button that says that they can't see anybody else's answers until they've posted their own. So that prevents them from just saying, yeah, I agree with whatever so-and-so said. Yeah, that's the right answer. And all, because that's just.
I agree doesn't count. 0 points. And they know that ahead of time.
Well, I do encourage you to take a look at the bingo cards, because I've had good success with my students keeping their ears, open while they're listening to me. I don't tend to sit there and lecture all day, but I may end up giving a 10-15 minute discussion. And sometimes you can also just use those cards like as the answer. So you give them the definition of something, and then you ask them, and then they have to identify what's on the card that is that. So you could use it for something like a biology class or a chemistry class to see if they know the definition of things. So you can do it as straight bingo, where you can say, okay, you maybe create cards that have these definitions on them, and you can say, well, I'll give you a business example. This is the person who is the head of a corporation who reports to the board of directors. So the answer would be CEO, and then they have to know, well, that's the CEO, and then they click it. But I really do like those bingo cards because it's so easy to mark them. You can also print them out, by the way, if you wanted to have them printed out. Otherwise, students can do them on their phone. You just give each student a different number, and they choose that, and they click on that card, and they go from there. So that's a way to increase some of the fun in the class. All right. Well, if I don't have any more questions, I hope that you found some of these helpful or interesting or got you thinking. It was a pleasure being here. I'll see you in some of the other sessions to come. Thank you so much for joining me.